They tried to steal my farm, not with a gun, not in the dark, in broad daylight, with a certified letter, a crooked planning board vote, and a lowball appraisal that valued 3 generations of my family's sweat at $38,000. The HOA president had already drawn the dog park on a map, named the walking trail, picked the pavement color. She just forgot to ask me. I'm Colt Hargrove. I farm 38 acres in Caldwell County, Virginia. And what I'm about to tell you is how one woman's petty power trip ended with me owning the land under her neighborhood's only road in or out, and a padlock she couldn't touch. What would you do if someone tried to take your family's land on paper? Drop it in the comments. And where are you watching from? I read every single one. The Hargrove farm sits on 38 acres at the western edge of Caldwell County, Virginia, where the suburbs finally run out of breath and give up. You know the spot. One minute you're driving past a Walgreens and a nail salon, and the next minute there's a rusted metal gate with a hand-painted sign that says, Hargrove Farm, Estate 1974, no trespassing. This means you. My grandfather Everett Hargrove put that sign up himself after some developer's surveyor wandered onto the property in 1987. The sign has never come down. I'm Colt Hargrove, 54 years old. I run about 60 head of Black Angus cattle, a kitchen garden big enough to supply 4 local restaurants, and one thoroughly overworked border collie named Ruckus, who believes he personally owns every inch of this land. My wife, Deanna, passed 4 years ago, breast cancer. She loved this farm more than she loved anything except our daughter, Marin, who now lives in Charlottesville and calls every Sunday. I kept farming because Deanna would have been furious if I'd stopped. Here's the problem with being a working farm inside a county that's been developing for the last 20 years. The city creeps. It doesn't run, it creeps. By 2009, a developer named Whitmore Properties had built 140 homes on what used to be the old Pruitt cornfields, directly adjacent to my eastern fence line. They called it Creekside Commons, which is funny because there's no creek, and there's certainly nothing common about the HOA fees they charge. When Whitmore filed the plat with the county, somebody in the planning office, sleepy, maybe hungover, possibly just indifferent, drew the HOA boundary in a way that technically swept in about 4 acres of my eastern pasture. Grandfathered, sure. Legally carved out as agricultural use, absolutely. But inside the boundary on paper, yes. I didn't think much about it for years. The HOA sent me their quarterly newsletter. I threw it away. They asked me to attend a meeting once about community landscaping standards. I sent back a note that said my landscaping standards were, keep the animals fed, keep the fences standing, mind your business. That went over about as well as you'd expect. Pamela Durst became HOA president in 2017. She had the energy of a person who spent 30 years telling other people what to do in corporate HR, and then retired and had absolutely nowhere to put it. She drove a white Volvo that she kept so clean it looked like it had never left a paved road. She wore athleisure to every public meeting as a power move, the kind of person who wants you to know she could leave at any moment to go to Pilates. She had opinions about mailbox colors, fence post heights, and the visual disruption caused by garbage cans left at the curb past noon on collection day. In March of 2021, I received a certified letter. The paper was heavy stock, the kind of paper designed to communicate institutional seriousness. I still remember the smell of it, that slightly chemical, ink and office smell you only get from a document someone paid a lawyer to format. The letter informed me that my round hay bales, stacked along my eastern fence line, were in violation of Section 4.7b of the Creekside Commons Community Standards. No structure, material, or agricultural byproduct shall be stored in a manner that creates visual disruption to the residential streetscape. My hay bales, round, golden, honest-to-God hay bales on a working cattle farm, visual disruption. I called the HOA's management company. The woman on the phone sounded deeply tired, the way people sound when they know they work for a ridiculous organization and have made peace with it. She told me I had 30 days to remediate. I asked her what remediating a hay bale looked like. She put me on hold for 4 minutes and came back with, perhaps a privacy screen? I thanked her politely and spent the next week thinking. That was the opening shot. I didn't know it at the time, but Pamela Durst had been looking at my farm for a long time. The hay bale letter wasn't about aesthetics. It was reconnaissance. I want to be clear. I did not fight the hay bale letter. I complied with it. Completely. Enthusiastically, even. I went to the farm supply store in Waynesboro and bought 48 rolls of black agricultural silage wrap, the heavy-duty kind used to bale haylage for fermentation. Over the next 2 weekends, my neighbor Wade Pickett helped me wrap every single round bale along that eastern fence line. From the street, what had once looked like a row of Golden Country hay bales now looked like a row of enormous black garbage bags, squat and slightly threatening in the morning fog. I texted Pamela Durst a photo and wrote, "Remediation complete per section 4.7b. Please confirm compliance." She did not confirm compliance. She called a special meeting. The Creekside Commons HOA meeting room was a converted 2-car garage attached to the clubhouse. Drop ceiling, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that felt personal, and a folding table setup that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and somebody's old carpet cleaner. 43 homeowners attended. I sat in the back row with my boots tracking red clay onto their beige linoleum, and I did not apologize for it. Pamela stood at the front in a burnt orange blazer over her yoga pants, dressed up for once, which told me she was serious. She had a PowerPoint. You always know it's bad when they have a PowerPoint. She called it the Creekside Commons Community Green Space Master Plan, and she had clearly spent real money on it. There were renderings, actual architectural renderings, of a landscaped dog park, a paved walking trail with solar-powered lighting, a small pavilion with a water feature. It looked like something you'd see in a commercial for a new development in Scottsdale. And centered on the map, shaded in the same cheerful green as a golf course, was my eastern pasture, all 11 acres of it. "The land is ideally situated," Pamela said, in the voice of a woman who has run many uncomfortable HR meetings and learned to project calm authority through the discomfort of others. "It's flat, accessible, already bounded by existing fencing and, as we all know, currently underutilized." A woman near the front murmured something appreciative. 2 men in the middle section looked at the floor. I stood up. I pulled the folded document from my jacket pocket. It was a certified copy of the 1974 deed and the 2009 grandfathering rider that my grandfather's attorney had attached when Whitmore's annexation went through. I found the key clause and read it aloud. "The agricultural use designation of the Hargrove parcel shall not be subject to HOA improvement orders, aesthetic compliance demands, or eminent domain proceedings initiated by the HOA or its designees, and this protection shall run with the land in perpetuity." I folded the paper back up. "The word perpetuity," I said, "means forever." I looked it up. There was a moment of silence in that humming room, the kind of silence where you can hear the fluorescent lights. Then Pamela smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that means someone knows something you don't. "Yes," she said. "We're aware of that rider. Douglas has been reviewing it." Douglas Fenn was Pamela's brother-in-law. He was also on the Caldwell County Planning Board, which, as it turned out, had the authority to review and potentially invalidate grandfathering designations when properties were subject to changed use conditions. Pamela had done her homework. She'd gone to the county, not just the HOA. She was playing a longer game than I'd realized. She didn't need to beat my deed rider in that room. She just needed me to know she was working on it. I drove home that night on a 2-lane road through the dark, past fence lines I know by muscle memory, and I thought about my grandfather. Everett Hargrove had put that no trespassing sign up himself. He'd fought the developer once. He'd won. My turn. The planning board review notice arrived on a Wednesday. Certified mail again. These people did love certified mail. That little green return receipt card, the formal weight of it. I imagine Pamela Durst sleeping soundly, knowing those green cards were out there in the postal system, flying toward my mailbox like little bureaucratic missiles. Douglas Fenn had submitted the review as a routine administrative evaluation of historical grandfathering designations in mixed-use boundary zones. That's government language for, my sister-in-law asked me to do this, and I'm doing it. The review would take 60 to 90 days and could, in theory, result in a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to modify or revoke the agricultural designation. I called Gretchen Mole the next morning. Gretchen was a real estate attorney out of Stanton, 51 years old, 5'3", with the energy of someone who had been underestimated in courtrooms her entire career and had built a very satisfying professional life out of proving people wrong. She wore her gray hair short and drove a truck that had seen better days. She was exactly the kind of attorney you want when somebody's brother-in-law is doing bureaucratic dirty work against you. She called me back inside 2 hours. "Douglas Fenn is a voting member of the planning board," she said. "His wife is Pamela Durst's sister. He did not recuse himself before initiating this review." That's a conflict of interest under Virginia's State and Local Government Conflict of Interests Act. The review may be procedurally void. I made a note of that. Virginia Conflict of Interests Act, one of the first tools in the toolbox. While Gretchen filed a formal conflict of interest objection with the Board of Supervisors, Pamela was busy on a second front. Over the following 3 weeks, 12 separate nuisance complaints were filed with the county against my farm. Noise from cattle, excessive odor, dust from the gravel lane, early morning equipment operation. They were filed by 12 different Creekside Commons homeowners. The complaints were almost identically worded, which meant either 12 people had the exact same experience at the exact same time, or one person had written a template and passed it around. I started a log. Date, time, what was happening on the farm, weather conditions, photos. I'd been farming long enough to know that documentation is just farming for lawyers. You keep records because you never know what season you're saving them for. Then the county environmental officer showed up. His name was Terry, and he arrived at 7:40 in the morning in a county-marked pickup truck, looking like a man who had been handed an assignment he didn't entirely believe in. He had a clipboard and a checklist, and the slightly apologetic manner of someone doing a job they didn't choose that morning. A warm October had left the barnyard carrying that particular blend of hay, cattle, and damp earth that farming people find entirely normal and non-farming people find alarming. Terry walked the manure management area, the runoff drainage, the storage shed. He checked boxes. He asked questions. I answered them. After 2 hours, he snapped his clipboard shut and said, "Everything looks fine, Mr. Hargrove. I'll note full compliance." I thanked him. He drove away. I took a photo of his departing truck with the timestamp showing. What Pamela didn't know, and what Gretchen discovered while reviewing the HOA's original incorporation documents, was that Whitmore Properties had never formally transferred the agricultural easement language from the county plat into the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CC&Rs referenced it, but didn't actually attach it, which meant the HOA's legal authority over my parcel was not just limited, it was arguably non-existent under their own governing documents. Gretchen called this a significant structural defect in their legal foundation. I called it good news. The thing about people like Pamela Durst is that they are very good at using the system as a weapon when they understand it. They are not prepared for the moment the system turns around. 90 days is a long time when someone is actively trying to take your land. It is also, as it turns out, a very useful amount of time to spend buying land. The Board of Supervisors tabled Gretchen's conflict of interest objection on what they called procedural grounds, meaning they kicked it 90 days down the road to let the planning board complete its review first, before deciding whether the review was even valid. Government logic. You learn to love it. Pamela, energized by the delay, called a full HOA vote. She presented the Eastern Pasture acquisition to the community as a matter of enhancing collective property values and creating sustainable green infrastructure for current and future residents. She had the renderings printed on foam board. She brought cookies. The vote passed 67 to 41, with a handful of abstentions from neighbors who kept looking at the floor. The formal notice of intent to acquire arrived the following Monday. The HOA had commissioned their own appraisal, submitted by a firm called Clearwater Valuation out of Richmond. They valued my 11-acre eastern pasture, flat, well-drained, fenced, with road frontage on 2 sides, at $38,000. That's roughly $3,400 an acre for land that comparable sales in Caldwell County would put between $6,200 and $8,400 per acre. They came in at less than half market value. I read the notice twice. Then I called Gretchen. They can't force a sale at that price, she told me. Even if they had the legal authority to acquire, which is highly questionable, they'd be subject to just compensation requirements. This number is theater. I know, I said. They're hoping I'll take it. I didn't take it. I submitted a counter-appraisal through Gretchen's office, 4 comparable sales within 8 miles, a certified appraiser, and a valuation of $77,500. I sent it back certified mail, green return card and all. But the more interesting thing I did that week was drive around. I have a habit, when I'm working something through, of getting in my truck and driving the fence lines. Not my fence lines specifically, just the roads, looking at the land, thinking about who owns what, what's being used, what isn't. Deanna used to call it Colt's agricultural brooding. She wasn't wrong. I knew the Creekside Commons development sat bounded by my farm to the west, by Route 614 to the east, and by 2 large parcels on its northern and southern edges that had been sitting idle for years. The north parcel was the old Garrett lumberyard, 22 acres of cleared land with a gravel access road and an old equipment shed still standing. The south parcel was what locals called the Meeks Place, 31 acres of former cattle pasture that had been empty since Ray Meeks moved to Florida in 2018. I knew both properties had been sitting. What I didn't know, until I called a contact at the county treasurer's office named Burl Whitfield, who I'd known since high school, was that both parcels were in tax delinquency. The Garrett parcel owed 4 years of back taxes. The Meeks Place owed 3. Under Virginia's land tax sales statute, delinquent properties can be acquired through a circuit court proceeding, initiated by the county or by a qualifying third party. Burl told me the county had been intending to initiate those proceedings for over a year, but hadn't gotten around to it. I told Burl I might be able to save the county some paperwork. 53 acres of land, one to the north, one to the south, sitting like parentheses around the only road access Creekside Commons had to Route 614. I drove home past both parcels in the October dark, Ruckus asleep in the passenger seat, and I started doing math on a legal pad at the kitchen table until almost midnight. The smell of old coffee and scratched arithmetic. Some of my best thinking happens that way. Gretchen called me on a Thursday afternoon in early November. I was in the north pasture checking a fence post that Ruckus had been acting suspicious about, which is the border collie equivalent of a structural engineer flagging a load-bearing wall. I remember the cold coming off the ground, that particular dry November cold that smells like iron and dead grass. "Colt," she said, "I need you to sit down somewhere. I'm standing in a field. Lean against the truck." I leaned against the truck. She talked for 11 minutes. I said 4 words, which were, "Say that again, slower." Here's what Gretchen had found, buried in a title search for the Garrett parcel. When Whitmore Properties built Creekside Commons in 2008 and 2009, they needed road access from Route 614 into the development. They built Whitmore Drive, a standard residential access road, 2 lanes, curbed, with streetlights. The development agreement with Caldwell County required Whitmore to formally dedicate a 40-foot right-of-way strip at the Route 614 intersection as a public road. The dedication was referenced in the agreement. It was drawn on the plat. There was a ceremony of some kind, probably involving a person from the county holding a pen. But the formal deed of dedication was never recorded in the county clerk's office. The ceremony happened. The paperwork didn't. For 16 years, Whitmore Drive had been a private road, sitting on a strip of land that was technically still part of the Garrett parcel, which had been sold, resold twice, and finally abandoned into tax delinquency, which meant whoever acquired the Garrett parcel would acquire that strip, and whoever held that strip would hold a recorded interest in the only paved road in or out of Creekside Commons. Not the road itself, the land under it. That is a very different kind of leverage. Gretchen was careful to explain it the right way. This wasn't a blockade. It wasn't illegal road closure. That would require a court process and proper notice. What it was, legally, was a negotiating position of extraordinary strength. The HOA wanted to take my land? Fine. Let's talk about the land under their road. The second piece of news was almost as good. Gretchen had pulled the HOA's most recent financial disclosure. Virginia law requires HOAs to make these available to all members, and as a property technically within the HOA boundary, I qualified as a member. The Creekside Commons Reserves Fund held $14,000. Their monthly operating costs ran approximately $8,000. The legal fees from the acquisition push and the planning board proceedings had cost them, by Gretchen's estimate, somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 already. They were running out of money. Pamela was running an aggressive legal and political campaign on an HOA that was nearly broke. I told Gretchen to move on both back tax parcels immediately. I told her to keep it quiet. No press, no neighbors, no public filings beyond what was legally required for the circuit court proceeding. I went back to checking that fence post. Ruckus sat down in the frost and watched me, head tilted, with the look he gets when he thinks I'm onto something. Smart dog. I had 3 tools. The thing about 3 tools is that you use all 3 at the same time, so that the person on the other side can only block 2 of them. The first tool was the land. Virginia Code Section 58.1-3965. I'll save you the legal dictionary version and just tell you what it means in practice. When a property owner in Virginia fails to pay real estate taxes for a sufficient period, the county can go to circuit court and have the property sold to recover the taxes owed. A qualifying third party, meaning me, can file that petition on the county's behalf, pay the back taxes, court costs, and a small premium, and end up with a deed to the property. It's not hostile, it's not sneaky. It's the system working exactly as designed. People who abandon land and don't pay taxes on it lose the land, and someone who will actually use it gets it. Both petitions, the Garrett parcel and the Meeks pasture, were filed in circuit court in late November. Under the statute, notice had to be published in the Caldwell County Legal Gazette, which is a newspaper that has approximately 47 regular readers, none of whom are Pamela Durst. Tool 2 was the Conflict of Interest complaint. Gretchen filed it with the Virginia Conflict of Interests Advisory Council, which is a state-level oversight body that reviews complaints against local government officials. Douglas Fenn's failure to recuse himself was documented, dated, and supported by 3 independent affidavits from planning board meeting attendees. The council doesn't move fast, but it moves publicly, and the complaint would show up on Douglas Fenn's professional record, regardless of outcome. Tool 3 was the financial audit. Virginia's Property Owners Association Act gives HOA members the right to formally request inspection of the association's financial records. I submitted a written request on December 2nd, signed, certified, return receipt. Pamela had 14 days to respond. When an HOA is nearly insolvent and its president knows you're looking at the books, 14 days feels like a long time. Wade Pickett came over on a Saturday in early December to help me think through the gate. Wade was 61, built like a man who had spent 4 decades doing physical work without ever deciding to stop. And he had his own HOA grievance from 2019, involving a fence they'd cited him for that was explicitly permitted under county agricultural code. He harbored that grievance the way some men carry pocket knives, quietly, always available. We stood at the Route 614 frontage of the Garrett parcel in the cold, and I explained what I was thinking. A legal agricultural gate, permitted through the county, installed on my property, designed to control access to the private farm road that ran across the Garrett parcel. Not a blockade, a gate with a lock on private land. How wide's the right-of-way strip? Wade asked. 40 feet, I said, just enough for the road and a 6-inch shoulder on each side. So there's no way around it. No parallel path, no alternate route. The only other route in or out is over the Meeks pasture, which will be mine by February if the court moves on schedule. Wade looked at the fence line for a long moment. The December wind smelled like cold metal and distant wood smoke. Colt, he said, that's 2 parentheses, and you're closing both of them. Marin was home for Thanksgiving when I walked her through the whole thing. She sat at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter and Gretchen's case summary. The last of the pie smell still drifting from the kitchen, Ruckus pressed against her shin because he loves her best of anyone. She found something Gretchen and I had both slightly glossed over. The Whitmore Development Agreement's access easement language included a clause stating that, in the event the right-of-way dedication failed, the easement would revert to the original grantor or its assigns. The original grantor was Whitmore Properties, which had since been dissolved, which meant the reversion language was effectively void, and the strip was clean title with no easement attached. "Dad," she said, looking up, "you're not just getting leverage, you own the road." Pamela found out about the circuit court petitions on a Tuesday in mid-December. I know this because by Wednesday morning, I had 3 voicemails, one from a neighbor, one from a county commissioner's aide, and one from Pamela herself, which I did not return. By Wednesday afternoon, the Protect Creekside Commons Facebook group had been created with 62 members, and Nextdoor was hosting what I can only describe as a community anxiety spiral. Pamela's post read, "Colt Hargrove is attempting to illegally seize community-adjacent land through a predatory legal process. This is an attack on all of us. Please attend Thursday's emergency meeting." I'll give her credit for one thing. She could move fast. The emergency meeting had 48-hour notice, foam board signs in 3 yards by Thursday morning, and a sign-up sheet for community action volunteers. She had organized enough people quickly enough that from a distance it looked like a movement rather than a single person in a burnt orange blazer with a vendetta. The 3 neighboring landowners she approached about buying the parcels were polite but confused. 2 of them called me. One of them, a retired school teacher named Beverly Trent, who owned a small parcel just east of the Meeks property, told me Pamela had offered her $2,000 to sign some kind of letter to the court. Beverly told Pamela she'd think about it. Then she called me and told me what Pamela had said, word for word, because Beverly Trent had taught civics for 30 years and understood what attempted witness tampering looked like, even if she didn't use that phrase. I thanked Beverly and wrote it down. The law firm out of Richmond, Draper & Cullen LLC, civil litigation specialists, sent Gretchen a 4-page cease and desist letter on December 18th. It claimed that my gate installation plans constituted tortious interference with established community access rights and an illegal scheme to deprive residents of their property rights. It demanded I halt all circuit court proceedings, withdraw all financial audit requests, and engage in good faith mediation. Gretchen read it, made some notes, and wrote back a 2-paragraph response. The summary: the gate plans were on private land pending court-ordered transfer. The circuit court proceedings were public statutory processes she had no authority to halt even if she wanted to, and the financial audit request was a statutory right that could not be waived by demand letter. She invited them to cite the specific legal authority for any of their claims if they wished to continue the correspondence. Draper & Cullen did not respond for 11 days. I spent December doing what I always do in December: fence maintenance, equipment winterization, making sure the cattle had sufficient hay through to March. The days were short and gray and smelled like cold mud and diesel. I kept my log. I kept my documentation. I answered the Caldwell County Courier reporter's request with a yes, gave him 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon, and walked him through the entire timeline with copies of every certified letter, every notice, every appraisal, every complaint filing. He was 26 years old and had been covering the county for a year. He had the slightly overwhelmed look of someone who had come looking for a neighborhood dispute story and found something considerably larger. I gave him Gretchen's number for the legal pieces. I gave him Burl Whitfield's number for the tax proceeding background, with Burl's permission. The story was scheduled to run in the first week of January. Pamela, meanwhile, was still running Facebook posts. There is something almost poignant about a person burning enormous social and political energy on a platform, while the actual situation is being decided in circuit court documents and county real estate records. The digital noise was real and loud. The legal ground was shifting silently underneath it. Ruckus and I walked the south fence line the last evening of the year. The stars were clear and cold, the kind of clarity you only get when it's well below freezing and the air has no moisture left in it. I could see the lights of Creekside Commons through the bare trees, warm yellow windows, people going about their evenings, most of them decent people, who had ended up on the wrong side of a bad leader's agenda. I didn't want to hurt them. I just needed the woman who represented them to understand consequences. The newspaper story landed on a Thursday morning, January 9th. I got a copy at the drugstore on Route 614. They still sell the physical paper there, and I still buy it that way, and read it in the truck in the parking lot. The reporter had done his homework. The headline was clean and accurate. The conflict of interest angle was explained without sensationalism. There were quotes from Gretchen, a statement from the county attorney's office confirming the circuit court proceedings were valid, and a response from the HOA's Richmond law firm that said, "No comment on pending litigation." Pamela Durst was quoted directly in the 3rd paragraph saying, "This is a coordinated attack on our community by a single aggrieved property owner. I have been called worse things. Douglas Fenn filed a recusal notice with the planning board on January 13th, a Monday, which meant he'd spent the weekend with a lawyer. The board voted 4-1 to dismiss the grandfathering review as improperly initiated. The one dissenting vote was from a board member whose name I will not mention, except to say he also coached the HOA's youth soccer program. The grandfathering designation on my eastern pasture was formally restored to full standing. That was the legal flank secured. The political flank was about to collapse too. Pamela had been making calls to two members of the Board of Supervisors, Garrett Hayes and Donna Sullins, about initiating a county condemnation of my pasture on public benefit grounds. The theory was that a dog park and trail system counted as public infrastructure. It was a stretch, but in the right political environment, stretches sometimes work. The county attorney pulled Hayes and Sullins aside before they could take any action and explained the situation clearly. Condemnation for the benefit of a private HOA does not meet the public use standard required under Virginia and federal takings law, and any supervisor who voted for such a proceeding would face personal legal exposure. Hayes called Pamela that evening and told her he couldn't help her. Sullins sent a letter. Pamela was now 0 for 3 on her external strategies. The planning board, the supervisors, the Richmond law firm, all had been closed off. Her only remaining leverage was the HOA itself, which was running on financial fumes and social media momentum. The circuit court granted the Garrett parcel petition on January 28th. I wired $14,200 in back taxes and $800 in court costs to the county treasurer's office and received a recorded warranty deed 3 days later. I was now the legal owner of 22 acres north of Creekside Commons, including a 40-foot strip of land under the development's only paved access road. Draper and Cullen, sensing the math, sent a settlement offer. The HOA would formally withdraw the acquisition attempt, and in exchange, I would drop the gate plan and close the financial audit request. No admission of wrongdoing, no costs, clean slate. I had Gretchen send back my counter, withdraw the acquisition vote, reimburse my legal fees of $22,000, and Pamela Durst resigns as HOA president. I gave them 10 days. Pamela refused. She issued a statement on the Facebook group calling my counter extortion and saying she would fight this to the end in defense of the community. The gate materials arrived on February 3rd. Heavy agricultural steel, powder-coated black, post hole digger, concrete, hardware. Wade Pickett showed up at 7 in the morning with his tractor and a thermos of coffee. The permit was posted on the stake. Everything was legal, permitted, documented. We broke ground on a cold Tuesday morning. The sound of the post hole digger and the frozen earth carried a long way in the still air. Clear across the fence line, probably. Into the development even. Some sounds are messages. The Creekside Commons HOA annual meeting was held on February 19th at 7 o'clock in the evening in the clubhouse, which is a word that makes the converted garage room sound considerably grander than it is. The folding tables had been arranged in a horseshoe. The fluorescent lights hummed their particular note. Someone had set out a sheet cake on the refreshment table that nobody was going to eat under the circumstances. Gretchen and I arrived at 6:45. Wade sat in the back row with his arms crossed and said nothing. Beverly Trent was 3 seats over. The Courier reporter was there with a notebook. A local TV news crew, WVIR out of Charlottesville, drawn by the paper's coverage, stood against the back wall with a camera and a light that made everything look slightly clinical. Pamela opened the meeting in a burnt orange blazer, same one. I wondered if it was the only one she had, or if it was her armor. She was moving through the agenda with the focused energy of a person who has decided to treat a wildfire like a scheduling problem. I raised my hand. Under the Virginia Property Owners Association Act, a member in good standing may bring business before the annual meeting. I was a member. I was in good standing. I set 4 documents on the table. The first was the recorded warranty deed for the Garrett parcel, 22 acres, including the 40-foot strip. I slid a copy toward the HOA attorney, a man named Prescott from Draper and Cullen, who had the look of someone billing by the minute and wishing he were somewhere else. "Would you confirm for the room," I said, "that this strip, as legally described, is the land beneath Whitmore Drive?" Prescott looked at it for a long moment. He was a professional. He confirmed it. The room went very quiet, the way rooms go quiet when 60 people suddenly understand something important at the same time. The second document was the circuit court order for the Meeks pasture. The hearing had concluded that week, the deed was pending. The southern parcel. The second parenthesis, closing. The third document was the financial audit. HOA reserves, $6,800. Monthly obligations, approximately $8,000. Projected insolvency, within 60 days without an emergency assessment. The fourth document was a printed copy of the Virginia Conflict of Interests Advisory Council finding, issued the previous week. Violation confirmed. Letter of censure issued to Douglas Fenn. Case referred to the county attorney for review. The TV camera was rolling. Pamela had gone very still. A homeowner named Chester Briggs, retired, gray mustache, the kind of man who has sat in the back of meetings for years, waiting for the right moment, stood up. "I'd like to make a motion," he said, "to recall Pamela Durst as HOA president, effective immediately." The second came from 3 different directions at once. The vote was 71 to 38. Pamela stood at the front of the room for a moment after the count was announced, and I thought about what it must feel like to have run something for 6 years and lose it in a folding chair meeting under fluorescent lights. I did not feel sorry for her. I felt something more like solemn. She had done this to herself, methodically, over 4 years. She picked up her papers. She walked toward the door. Gretchen's voice was quiet and even. "Ms. Durst, the financial audit identified certain expenditures that appear outside the scope of authorized HOA activities. Those findings have been referred to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. You may want to retain personal legal counsel before responding to any inquiries." Pamela stopped, said nothing, walked out. The click of the exterior door. Then, a few moments later, through the windows, the twin white lights of a Volvo backing out of the parking lot, swinging hard onto the road, moving fast. Gone. I drove to the Garrett parcel after the meeting. 10:15 on a cold February night, the stars blazing, my breath visible in the headlights. I walked to the gate, pulled the padlock from my jacket pocket, and closed it. The click of that lock was the quietest, most satisfying sound I had heard in 4 years. Chester Briggs turned out to be a fine interim president. He'd lived in Creekside Commons since 2011, and had spent 8 years watching Pamela Durst run the HOA like a personal fief, while he filed his complaints into the void and attended meetings where nothing he said mattered. He approached the settlement negotiation with what I can only describe as the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time. We signed the agreement on March 4th. The HOA cut a check for $22,000, which I immediately endorsed over to Gretchen because she had earned every dollar of it twice over. The acquisition resolution was formally rescinded by board vote. I granted a permanent recorded easement for Whitmore Drive, and simultaneously Gretchen filed the strip deed with the county as the public right-of-way dedication that Whitmore Properties had promised in 2008 and failed to deliver for 16 years. The county accepted it. The gate came down. Wade and I pulled the posts ourselves on a windy Saturday morning in early March, the smell of cold mud rising from the post holes as we worked. The Meeks pasture deed came through the second week of March. 31 acres of clean, flat, former cattle pasture, and I had no personal use for it. What I did with it was give it to the Caldwell County Land Conservancy under a permanent agricultural conservation easement. That means no development, no subdivision, no commercial construction, forever. A perpetuity designation, you might say. I like that word. My grandfather taught me to like it. The Garrett parcel took more thought. I kept the road strip, which now belongs to the county, and turned the remaining 18 acres into a working demonstration farm under a partnership with the county school system and the local 4-H chapter. We broke ground in May. It's called the Hargrove Agricultural Education Center, Deanna's idea, technically, because she always said the best thing about farming was teaching it. We built it for her. The kids come on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the spring and fall. You can hear them from my north pasture fence line, the sound of children arguing about the correct way to plant a bean, which is the same argument every generation of farmers has in every generation. Douglas Fenn resigned from the planning board in March, citing personal circumstances. The Commonwealth's attorney investigation into the HOA's financial irregularities is ongoing. I won't speculate about outcomes, but I will say that Gretchen's audit identified approximately $31,000 in HOA fund expenditures that lacked proper board authorization, a significant portion of which appeared to have been used for legal and consulting fees that benefited the HOA president personally. Pamela Durst listed her house in April. It sold in 3 weeks. I don't know where she went. I don't need to. Marin started coming home more often in the spring. By June, she had a desk in the farmhouse office and a spreadsheet tracking restaurant supply contracts in 4 counties. By August, she'd negotiated 3 new accounts and was talking about adding a small farm stand. She has Deanna's head for numbers and my stubbornness, which is a dangerous combination in the best possible way. I stood at the south fence line on an evening in late July, the air thick with the smell of warm hay and cut grass, the cattle moving slow in the evening gold, the sound of Ruckus working the perimeter with his focused, particular efficiency, and thought about a November morning and an orange survey flag in my grandfather's vegetable garden. They wanted to turn a working farm into a dog park. They had procedural tactics, political connections, a law firm, a Facebook group, and 6 years of institutional momentum. What they didn't have was a deed, a patient attorney, a knowledge of Virginia land law, and a border collie who never stops checking the fence line. Here's what I want you to take from this, and I mean this practically. Document everything, learn your local land law, and never assume the system works against you until you've read the statute yourself. The same government machinery that Pamela weaponized against me was also the machinery that saved my land. The conflict of interest statute, the back tax acquisition law, the HOA disclosure requirements. The tools are there. You just have to be willing to pick them up. Ruckus is fine, by the way. He turned 9 in June. He has opinions about the 4-H kids that he expresses through focused staring.
32 years that windmill ran without a single complaint. Then Darlene got a golf cart and a laminated badge. Suddenly, it was a problem. That's how it always starts, not with a big villain, just someone with a little authority and too much time, who's never once been told no by somebody who actually knew their rights. Zentry knew his. A 1994 easement recorded in black and white, running with every deed on that street. 4 words that ended Darlene's entire case before it ever reached a judge. Apartment. Perpetua. Runs with land. She had been drinking that water for years and never thought to ask where it came from. The $12,000 she had been quietly paying herself, that came out too. Otis made sure of it. 2 years of notes, 1 yellow legal pad, 1 moment that counted. And that money didn't disappear into legal fees. It became a scholarship, named after the man who built the windmill. A kid from Ingram is going to study water science because one farmer refused to sign anything. Here's what I want to know. Have you ever actually read your HOA documents? All of it, because your protection is probably in there. So is your exposure. Drop your story below. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when the next one fights back. Small authority, big consequences. Every time.